Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Mary Oliver.
Some people found me annoying. Like, to be so happy was almost like a privilege. Like, who does she think she is to be so like happy and enthusiastic? I one time had a teacher come in my classroom as I was teaching, and she pulled me aside and she told me, like, you can't go on like this. You can't possibly go on like this. You can't be so enthusiastic. And I'm just like, but I am. I am so enthusiastic.
Before Alexa West became the quintessential solo girl traveler, inspiring a new generation of women to confidently travel the world on their own, she was a solo girl volunteer, still helping young women, but from a very foreign village in rural Bulgaria. It was a vital step in the journey to becoming a truly badass traveler. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful. Stories.
I was born in California, but very quickly moved to Plano, Texas with my family. So I grew up with Sunday school and J.C. Penney and playing outside, and, I learned to speak with y'all and yes ma'am and all that kind of stuff. And then my father found another woman and left me and my mom and my brothers. And so we moved up to Washington, to Gig Harbor, Washington, when I was in third grade. So instead of Sunday school, I got to trade my life for playing outside in the forest, in the woods, and becoming kind of like this nature girl instead of this suburban concrete girl, which I'm very thankful for. My mom was a single mom, so she wasn't around much. So I just went solitary, and I used my mind as my imagination. My grandma used to tell stories about, she'd try to get me to school, and I'd always be late because I'd be at the kitchen table being like, I gotta finish this story. I just gotta finish this story. So I've always been a writer, and looking back, I think this was always my path. I moved to a town, Gig Harbor, which was also this like little Christian town. In the summers, they would do mission trips down to Mexico. And I would go on these mission trips to this orphanage and every summer in high school. And I quickly learned that not all humanitarian efforts were good. And so I would go on this orphanage mission trip and realize that it was just a big old kind of scammy thing. But while I was there, I realized there is good that you can do in the world, and this isn't it. And I kind of wanted to find it. I wanted to know the difference between where I could be in the world and actually be a help rather than a hurt. I had such a huge heart, and I think that everyone that went down there had such a huge heart and wanted to do the right thing. But it's encased in what? Encased in good intentions or encased in kind of nefarious stuff. So I had that big heart, but just was looking for where to place it. And I knew where not to place it. I went to UW, and I had that experience, right, of like, I want to see the world, but I don't know how I would do it. And I walked by, it was just a magical moment. I walked by the Peace Corps office, and it was the first time the words Peace Corps had ever come across. I saw a poster, and it was just one of those moments that I stopped and I was like, this is it. Like, this is it. But I had a boyfriend at the time, and little college me was also like, but I could also just, get married and like be a housewife, which I think is a cool thing to do still. But I was like, he would never do the Peace Corps with me. He would never move. But when he broke up with me, I cried for like 24 hours. And then a little piece inside of me was like, I know what we're doing now. I know what we're doing. We're doing the Peace Corps. I knew nothing about Bulgaria. I remember getting the packet in the mail. I was barefoot, and I got my big Peace Corps packet in the mail. And I remember running to my kitchen table, opening it up, and seeing the bold word Bulgaria. And I was like, where the hell is that? So I did some research, and most of the research I did was in language, and I just practiced the language obsessively until I got there. And I thought that I was going to have these like running through the hills, holding hands with children, picking flowers, which totally happened. My PST placement in this village was that. It was donkeys and rolling hills and wonderful people. Like, it was amazing. But outside of that little bubble of a village, it was more what I think of Eastern Europe now, which is a bit tougher and colder and not as smiley. And I'm this, young 23-year-old American girl just being like, hello, everybody. Hello. And then just looking at me, just thinking something was wrong with me, honestly. In my PST village, I was one of the only blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. And my host brother one night told me in Bulgarian that we're going to go to a party in the hills. And I just was thinking, what could this be? And we walk up into these mountains behind these kind of shanty houses. And all of these people I'd seen around town that were very cold-faced were now at this party, which Bulgarians can set up a party like no other. Long tables, so much food. They had a truck with music and everyone's dancing. And in Bulgaria, there are very specific dances that if you go to a restaurant, everyone will get up and they all know the choreography. They'll hold hands, very much like a Greek wedding, right? But Bulgarian. And they'll do these dances. And I just had one of those moments of, I am the first American to ever attend a party in the hills, because this wasn't a village that had volunteers before. And it was just one of those moments of holding hands, having these people whose language I couldn't yet speak. I think I was only 2 weeks in, teaching me how to dance in the middle of nowhere. And that was one of those moments of I am so far from home. I am so far from anything I've ever seen or known. And that was one of those moments of I just want everyone to experience what I'm experiencing of slight integration. Just the slightest integration. I think it was just that feeling of dipping below the veil. And I was okay, I'm here, I'm doing it. It was a night that I fell in love with a village boy. And so my brother took me home and he locked me in my room and he's, you can't leave, you can't see that boy. And so then I climbed out the window and it just had this village romance. And that's how I learned Bulgarian so well, is having a village romance. Picture a really tall, big, brown, post-communist block apartment. And I remember walking into this apartment with my language tutor, totally run down. And we went to go use the elevator. And she was no, we use the stairs. I'm look, let's just use the elevator. We have all these bags. And she's you cannot trust the elevators in these buildings. This apartment in this building was absolutely infested with cockroaches. I'd never seen a cockroach in my life. And I had this apartment and I would turn the light out at night. And as I would turn the light out, I could hear just I could hear them just coming out. And I knew that if I had to go to the bathroom, I would have to play The Floor is Lava, that game. And I would jump from the bed to the couch. I would turn a light on. I'd wait for them to scurry. But then I would have to go into the bathroom, which was also the shower. And there's the shower drain that I would have to cross to get to the toilet. But that's where they all would be. So every night I would have this bravery challenge of just smashing cockroaches to get to my toilet. And this is not the flowers and children and village that I pictured whatsoever. And I'm really glad that they put this cheerful little American girl in this post-communist cockroach-infested apartment. It made a woman out of me for sure.
Is that the point when you asked yourself, what have I gotten myself into?
No, I felt empowered. I felt badass. I felt I'm made for this. I'm tough enough. And I knew my neighbors lived through this stuff. It was more just, how is everyone else here doing this without freaking out? And I didn't want to be the gentle little princessy thing. And so it toughened me up for sure. I was okay with it. And eventually I also learned to advocate for myself. And I eventually did, after some struggle, get moved to another apartment. My Bulgarian got good enough that I would speak And they would think I was Bulgarian because I could blend in, like there's enough people that look just like me. And I remember one day going to like the train station and the lady kept telling me something that this train wasn't running. And I was telling her like, I don't understand. And she's like, how do you not understand? I'm like, I'm not from here. And, so I had that. But then in my little block, I had the woman on the corner who spent some time in Chicago. So she wanted to speak English all the time. So I couldn't get around the corner without seeing her. I would have to take different routes to like avoid her. There was also quite a few like older Bulgarian men who were like widowed or single who definitely would like bring me apples, So I had that. But besides that, if I left my little area, I was able to blend in enough, especially if you shop at the local shops and you speak the language and you do as the locals do. I was able to blend in. So I had that cool feature.
Are apples like a Bulgarian courting ritual?
It certainly felt like it. It didn't, I don't think so, but it certainly felt like it. But I also made the mistake. I made muffins one day and I put them in like little Ziploc bags. And I went to give them to my neighbors, and I went to give them to one of my neighbors. He was an older married man. And I went to give him a bag of muffins. That's very Texas of me, right? Like you move into a neighborhood and you bring people like a Jell-O mold or something. And he was like, no, I'm married. And I'm like, no, it's just muffins. And he's like, oh, no. So I guess maybe giving treats is courting. My primary job was a TEFL teacher in high school. Then I took on a secondary placement in a dom za deca, so a house for kids whose parents aren't available to raise them. And in the high school, it is mostly like kind of well-to-do kids, Bulgarian kids. But in Bulgaria, there is another population called the Romi population. So in, France, you might call them gypsies, which is actually a super, offensive term. These Romi people. And it is basically a segregated system still, including in this town. And you have the river that would separate the Bulgarians and the Romis. There was another volunteer in my village who worked at this dom za deca, this orphanage-ish, for these Romi kids. And he and I started partnering up. He would come to my school in the mornings. I would go to the dom za deca in the afternoon. And these two separated groups, we were able to bring together. We started a club at my high school, bringing these Bulgarian kids across the river to the orphanage to interact. And it was beautiful. But it also ended up becoming too political. But that was my calling, is connecting across political lines. When I started the project of bringing my high school kids to the orphanage in the afternoons, eventually there was, some drama, and the other volunteer that was in my village was moved out of our village. So it was just me. In the mornings, I would go to the school, and in the afternoons, I would go to this orphanage. And this orphanage, it housed, except for one little boy, it was all Romi kids. And it was one orphanage director, and they didn't get a lot of funding. Most of her funding came from the German Red Cross. And so when the Peace Corps removed that volunteer from her, it was just me. And she relied on me. And the kids, these are kids without parents. They really relied on me to be there emotionally for them. Every day, I would get up and I would go to the high school and I would have fun and I would see that these kids were learning. But then I would cross the river and I would go over there and it would be something else. It would be just so much deeper, not just for the connection between me and the kids, but also the connection between me and the orphanage director, who I think she felt unseen. I think she felt all of her ideas weren't important or weren't worthy. So she and I worked together really well. The moment that I cherish the most from my time working there, it was the first day of school. I wasn't at the high school that morning. I woke up early to go with the kids to their first day of school. And there was only 3 of us directors, orphanage helpers. And so we had kids going into different classes. And one little girl, her name is Tanya, was just like the light of my life. And she was starting 2nd grade. And I got to go with her to her classroom. And I didn't know how important that was going to be. because it turns out on the first day of school in Bulgaria or in this area, there's this ritual where the parents come and there's like honey and bread, and they dip the honey in the bread for their student as like this good luck. And all of these kids had their parents there. And Tanya is wearing this dress that I hand sewed, like the holes closed, so she had a pretty dress. And she's wearing this dress, and I got to be that person for her. After that was done, and the teacher is in the front, and all of us parents are in the back, Tanya, she just kept looking back at me just to make sure I was there, but with the biggest smile. It was that day that she didn't have to start school as the weird little orphanage kid. She didn't have to start school as the only kid in her class without a parent. And I'll tell you that she was one of the darker-skinned girls there. I don't think any other parent would have stepped in. It's just not that culture. I don't think another parent would have stepped in. I think she would have been completely bypassed that whole day. And so I had all these these big things that I did in the Peace Corps, but it was these little things that I know sewed something in her heart that day. That was really important for me. In the first school that I taught at, there were these 3 Romy girls. Often these girls don't go past middle school because they get married. And I had these 3 girls, and I had this one classroom. And I walked into this classroom one morning, and it was a new classroom for me. And usually I would have like a co-teacher or something. And I walked in this classroom, and I said, these kids, like, where's your teacher? They're like, they don't give us a teacher. They had the technicum school. So they had that year a Romy school mixed with a Bulgarian school. They just shoved them all in a classroom, just let them sit there. It was crazy. But there are these 3 girls that were best friends. They weren't used to having any attention towards their intelligence. We were able to study together, and I was able to really get them into education to the point that they did well on a test. And I was so excited about it. And I went around town and I found their mothers, and I showed their mothers the tests. And those girls became my best students. I was so proud of them. They were doing so well after a few months. And then I come to school one morning, and all these kids are rushing out to tell me something. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And they said, Rosa got married. She's not coming back. Rosa, this little 13-year-old girl, got married to a man in his 40s, and she is now out of school. She was doing well. Her mom was proud. She was finding that she was intelligent, and now she's been pulled out of school to get married to a man in his 40s. Absolutely horrendous. And for me, that was a day that my mind shattered as an American girl who we'd never think about that. I think there's a lot of shatter points when you do something like this, especially when you're so young and out of college. That was a shatter point for me of just everything changed. The thing that I learned the most in the Peace Corps is when you move to a new town, you don't necessarily have to go meet the mayor. Sometimes, the most important person you can meet is the little woman who works at the auto body shop on the corner, who's going to be there for you and stand up for you. But she's also probably going to teach you more about the town than that mayor is going to teach you. So the way that I travel now, the way that I try to understand a country now or understand a culture now is from the bottom up, or what most people might just think is like the bottom, just some random man making juice on the corner. That's who I want to talk to. I would say that the Peace Corps taught me a lot about bureaucracy and the way things should be, and then really the way things are. It taught me to ask a lot of questions and decide very carefully who I'm asking questions to when I travel. I've always been the person that wants to talk to people, and especially I'm always rooting for an underdog. I'm always kind of a person that likes to protect people, especially people who are, overlooked. I think most Americans have huge hearts, but we don't know how to apply it. Sometimes maybe we're misguided in applying it. So I would say that I've always had a huge heart, which attracted me to the Peace Corps. And then the Peace Corps taught me how to actually do good rather than just be a taker. So in my travel guides and in how I teach people how to travel, we have these 11 travel commandments, and one of them is make sure that you give more than you take. I know I like fashion, I like beauty, I like all those kinds of things, but what I like the most is like a taco stand with some local dudes. And that's how I try to teach people how to travel. I want them, we say like we want to take the content away and bring back connection, because travel has become so much about, this like frilly stuff, but it's more about connection. After the Peace Corps, I just carried on, and I taught English in South Korea for 2 years and in Taiwan, and I was backpacking Southeast Asia and house sitting in Mexico, and just learning that the world really isn't as scary as people make it out to be. As long as, you're doing some research, you're not just throwing a random dart at a map and showing up there, you're doing some research. But I really want to change the future of how women travel. I am not a huge fan of like all-inclusive resorts. I'm not a huge fan of like cruises at all. And so I'm trying to pave these paths. I'm paving these paths for women. I'm using all of the wild experiences and the courage and the skills that I've learned by being a Peace Corps volunteer, really is how it all started. I'm kind of opening doors for women who haven't yet done that, or who aren't willing to dedicate, 27 months to a random mission in Tonga or something like that. There's an in-between. We can't ask everyone to leave their Apple Watches behind and go live in a village, but we can do something in between. And that's what I'm trying to help with is, if you buy my guidebooks, yeah, there's some nice resorts in there, but there's a lot of really local experiences that you'll have that do good, give good, and kind of connect us more back to what travel should be before this Instagram travel crap, It's about connection. It's about understanding who you are. It's not just like going on vacation. There's a difference between vacation and travel. There's a big difference. And that's what I do, is I help women understand and access experiences that mean something, and not just mean something to them, but mean something to the businesses and the people that they're interacting with. It's a give and take.
That music means that we're getting to the end of our episode, but I don't want to stop before I give Alexa a chance to respond to our dubious Aunt Deb.
Why would I send my daughter halfway across the world when there is plenty to do and see right here in the United States?
I left for the Peace Corps thinking I was going to change the world, but instead I understood it. I think just that if more of us Americans are leaving the world and standing outside of our country and understanding what the world is like, we can be a better part of it. It's how I really talk about the Peace Corps, is I want young girls to go and understand your place in the world, not just your opinion of the world. And another would be, when I was in the Peace Corps was phasing out of Bulgaria after, I think, like 25 years. I was on one of the last years. And maybe you're not going to make a huge difference in 1 year, but 25 years in one country, I really did see an impression of America and schools and volunteer programs. And you'd go into a town and they'd be like, oh, we had a volunteer 10 years ago and he taught us this, that, and the other, and he left behind this legacy. There is this friendship, even if you just want to call it that we're spreading across the world. And even just that, and even just leaving little impressions of like positivity and possibility, it has a ripple effect. So much so that now that the Peace Corps is not in Bulgaria, I went back a few years after that, and the towns that I visited, those programs are gone. Like not everything lasted. Not everything was supported. So this really nice, like, thin veil of Peace Corps volunteers all over the world does have an effect. It has an effect. It has an effect with individuals, has an effect with towns, and then it has effect with culture. I think what we spread is great.
Alexa West is the founder and CEO of the Solo Girls Travel Guide, a best-selling guidebook series for women. In 2011, she sat on her bedroom floor, packed her life into a backpack, and boarded a one-way flight with only a tiny amount of money to her name. 13 years later, she has turned that leap of faith into a global brand that teaches thousands of women how to travel the world with less fear and more fun. In her most recent book, The One-Way Ticket Plan, Find and Fund Your Purpose While Traveling the World, Alexa teaches that you don't need a big bank account or anyone's permission to lead an adventurous life. Alexa is a full-time author and professional friendship matchmaker. She leads female-only group trips around the world via her company, Glow Up Travel. She currently lives in an off-grid cabin outside Seattle and is teaching women how to rewild themselves. She is also the host of the true crime podcast, True Crime Travelers. You can follow her trips, cabin renovations, and learn more about her books at alexa-west.com or at Solo Girls Travel Guide on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to Soft Powerful Stories. We believe so strongly in the importance of United States engagement with the rest of the world. For more information about our mission, about our episodes, photos, music, place to leave feedback, check out softpowerfulstories.org. And if you enjoyed these stories and this mission, I would really strongly encourage you to follow the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and to leave us a positive review. We want to make sure that this podcast pops up in as many feeds as possible, and that will help. If you still want to help, point it in the direction of someone that you know who is dubious about this sort of thing, but do it in a nice way. Kate Furby designed our very cool logo, and my friend Kathy Zilski plays dubious Aunt Deb, which is quite a stretch if you know Kathy. My name's Christopher Wurst. Until next time.